Hey y'all, it's Cherry. Today I'm going to show you how to make this cute rag quilt. Here it is all finished. If you want to know how to make this, stay tuned. Let me unfold it so you can see it a little bit better. It's super soft and cozy, and it's really, really easy. This one is pretty small. It's kind of like about a baby size, maybe a little bit bigger. Not quite a twin, maybe like a crib size quilt. Perfect for a little kid. But they're really, really cute for kids and babies. If you want to see how it's made, stick around. For this quilt, you're going to need your material of choice. Now, I'm going to be using these baby blankets because I have them. These are receiving blankets. My daughter, one of my daughters, is now 2 years old, so I don't need them anymore. They're cotton, but they're really soft, and I think they're going to work really well. They actually feel like a little bit like flannel. They're a really soft cotton, so I think they're going to work really good. But for the back fabric, I'm going to buy some flannel or some fleece to go on the back. I think I'm going to buy some plain white flannel. Also, I have some straight pins. Also some safety pins. If you want to use safety pins to hold your pieces together, it doesn't matter. You can use either one. I'm going to use the straight pins. To cut your fabric, if you use yardage, you're going to want something to cut it with. You can use scissors, a rotary cutter. You'll want a cutting mat or something that you can cut on if you're using a rotary cutter. Don't use the dining room table because you'll mess up your wood or whatever it's made of. You'll mess it up. If you are using yardage, and I say that because you can buy fabric that's already cut. If you're using a charm pack, or if you go to your local fabric store, or even like Walmart or Target or something like that, and you can buy fabric squares that are already cut, then you don't have to worry about cutting out your squares. They'll already be cut for you. But I'm going to be using a stencil, which you can see on my fabric. I don't know if you can see it, but I already have the blue squares. I've already traced a lot of them. But yeah, I have a stencil. I'm going to be using 5.5 by 5.5. It's a piece of cardboard that I had, and I cut it out. This is a must for rag quilting. They're scissors with spring-form scissors. They're called ragging shears, and these will save your hands when you make rag quilt. You can do it without them. Yes, you can do it, but it will kill your hand if you do it without it. Of course, I have my fabric pen to draw my squares if you're going to be tracing a stencil. So these are your materials. This is what you're going to need. I'm going to stop here and then come back once I have all my squares drawn, start cutting them out, and then we'll go from there. Okay, so I'm sitting here cutting my squares, and one thing that I noticed that I wanted to point out is when you have fabric that has, for example, some of my blankets has a little embroidery design on it, like these 2 little butterflies and the little elephants here. When I'm drawing my squares like I have on this blanket right here, when I take my stencil and I do these blankets here, I'm going to start by putting my stencil right over this one because I don't want to end up cutting this embroidery in half. I want my square to end up like this. So I'm going to start with my stencil right here so that I get that one out so that this pattern right here ends up on my blanket. So I'm going to do that to each and every one of these. I've got my squares cut out. I decided to go with a pink flannel instead of white. I know I said I was going to use white, but I'm going to use pink. I got pink because there's so much pink in these blankets. I thought it would match everything. I'm going to go ahead and pin them. What I did was I have one of my patterns. See, I have the pattern on top. See, each has a pattern. And then underneath is the pink flannel. So I'm going to, what I did is I sandwiched them together. I am not going to put anything in the middle. I decided not to stuff them because I'm going to give, I think I'm going to do this as a giveaway quilt. Next time I go to one of the market days I do every year, and I'll probably do it in the summertime. So it'll probably be a cool, nice cool blanket during the summertime. I don't want to make it too thick and too warm like this big heavy quilt here. So I'm just going to sandwich these together, and I'm going to pin them, and then we'll get started on sewing. I've got all these pinned, so I'm ready to sew them now. And the way that I'm going to sew them is I'm actually going to chain piece them. It'll just go a lot faster that way, and if you don't know what chain piecing is, it's just sewing one piece right after another. So you don't have to worry about stopping, cutting the thread, then going to the next piece, and so on. It's just, it cuts through a lot of time, and it also saves you on thread. So let me show you what I'm doing. I'm actually gonna put one corner of my square sandwich right under the sewing machine, and I'm gonna sew from corner all the way down to the other corner. Okay, remove the pin when you get to the middle. Don't sew over the pin. Once you get to the end of sewing, just like that, the next one will come right up under here, and you'll just keep on sewing through. And you'll just go through this whole entire stack. I have more. This is just some of them. I don't know how big my quilt is going to be. I'm just going to put them all together and see how big it is. Okay, I'm just going to take the opportunity to show you this is what the chain stitch looks like. See how they're all pieced together? They're just kind of all attached. Just one long chain. And see, when you're all done, you can just snip, snip, snip. Just cut them all apart, and then you turn them around and you do the other corner to corner on each side, and you chain stitch again. All of your square sandwiches will be stitched with an X, going from corner to corner. Okay, as you can see, I'm done with all of my squares. I sewed them all. I did the whole X. You can see I sewed the X on all of the squares. I cut all of the chain stitching. I cut all the corners, and they're all stacked up. I got all the same fabric stacked together. And I'm all ready to lay out my pattern. I'm sitting in my living room, and I'm going to use my living room floor to lay it out, because you want a big space to lay out all of these squares. One thing I do want to point out is these two, let me take this one off. These two fabrics right here are very similar. This one is a pink heart, this one is a pink dot. Now, because they look so similar, I'm not going to put these two next to one another. So I'm going to get started laying these out, and I'm going to show you what I have when I'm all done. Alright, here is the final layout of what I got. I started with a different one in each row, so it did a diagonal pattern. One thing that I do want to mention is when you have a fabric that has stripes, you want to make sure that they're all laid the same. For instance, this one has stripes and is standing straight up. If you have one that's turned sideways like this, and all the rest are standing up, this one's going to stick out. I tried to make sure that all of my stripes are turned the same way, and that all of my little embroidery embellishments are standing straight up, and that they're spread out throughout the quilt. And then I'm going to stack them. And what I'm going to do is, this is going to be the top row, and this one's going to be the bottom row. This is going to be number 1. So I'm going to go on top, on top, on top, all the way across all 9. And then when I get to the end, you leave it here. Okay, here's all 10 of my rows. I was thinking I had 9 rows, but I actually had 10. And I pinned the top so I know which square is on top, and I also numbered them so I know which row goes on top. And I put an arrow so that I know which side is the top, because you don't want to, like if your stack gets turned, you don't want to sew them the wrong way. That'll help you while you're sewing. And then I'm going to just take them and stack them like this, carry them over to my sewing machine, and start sewing rows. And I'll show you how to do that. So this is my top stack. Like I said, when I stacked them, I put the first one on top. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started on sewing these rows. I'm going to start on this one. I left the paper on here because I want to remember which side is the top. I'm going to set these aside for now. I'm going to lay my row out the way that I had it. Just right along here. The way that I had it on the floor. Now the first thing I'm going to do is take the first 2 here, and I'm going to sew them together side to side, just like this, leaving the 2 tops up. And then I'm going to come in with the next one, the next piece of fabric, and sew those 2 sides together, just like that. And so on all the way down the row. Now normally in quilting you hide seams, obviously. But this one, since it's a rag quilt, you want the seams to go on the top side, the pretty side. So the seam is going to go on the top, so you want it to stick up. Now you can sew a 1/4 of an inch. Some people do a 1/2 an inch. It depends on how much fringe you want on the top of your quilt. I'll probably do a 1/4 of an inch or a little bit more than that. I'm not going to do a 1/2 an inch because I think that's too much. But it's your preference. You just have to make sure that you do the same stitch throughout the whole quilt. Otherwise your seams won't line up. Now you open it up. Now the reason I left my paper is so that you remember this is the first one, because you don't want to get confused and think that's the first one. And then sew the third one to the first one. It gets really confusing. This really helps. So take the next one, match it up. See how that's coming along? This is our first 3 pieces. Then we take the 4th one and you just match it up. And we'll keep going. And now we're done with this whole first row. Now that we're done with this one, we're going to do the same thing to the other 9 rows, and then we'll put them together. Here is row number 7. This is the next one I'm going to sew on. Here's the blanket. I have it sitting in my lap. So I'm going to take row 7, match it up with row 6, end to end. But you want to make sure that your seams are sandwiched together. And by sandwiched together, I mean they match. Every once in a while, you might get one that doesn't match, and that's okay because rag quilts are very forgiving in that sense. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start sewing these. I'm not going to use any pins because I rarely do. But you can if you want. It helps hold the sandwich parts in place. That helps sometimes. we've got our next row sewn on our quilt. And I'm just going to go through and do the next rows. I've got row 8 right here, row 9, and row 10. And when I'm done with the last 3 rows, I'll show you what it looks like when we're done. And then I'll show you how to snip it. And then we're going to wash it. Here is the finished quilt. It's a good sized baby quilt. The only thing left to do is I'm going to take it to my sewing machine and I'm going to sew 1/4 of an inch around the outside, so that it has a little edge all the way around the outside that I can snip, just like these.
I don't sing and I don't relax. This is the way I am, and I like it. I also like a little silence.
Alright, this is the final product. I just took it out of the dryer. As you can see, I sewed around the edge and I clipped all of the edges. It's all fringy. The more that you wash this, the more fluffy it's going to be. This is just the first wash, so you can still see where I snipped it, but it's super fluffy. But it will get more fluffy the more you wash it. And it's really raggy and cute. And this is what it looks like when it's all done. If you guys like this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. Bye guys!